Hello everyone, welcome back to another video of my opinions about classical music. Today we are of course talking about the wonderful performance of the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto by Brett Yang in relation to Twoset Violin's 4 million subscribers. Though technically as of today they still haven't reached 4 million subscribers. But let's just jump right into it anyway. But I bet you're thinking, hey, what kind of qualifications do you actually have to pick on someone else's performance? And truthfully, basically none. They are playing at such a high level I could never, actually pick on it. It kind of felt like giving marks on a test when I was going through it though, so yeah. It was weird, but it will be nice, hopefully. So, before I talk myself into an even bigger of a hole, let's just listen to where he begins the concerto. Haha, psych, pranked you. You thought I really wouldn't say anything about the Brook? I feel so bad for him though, look at his face, he looks so confused. He nailed it though, that's the worst part. I really hope we're getting Brook for 5mil or Brahms, but yeah. Anyway, let's actually look at Mendelssohn now. Before I begin though, I want to explain what I've done with my markings, because it's gonna look weird if you don't know. So basically, for Brett's playing, I've used 3 colors. The bass line is the non-colored parts, and I probably won't be talking a lot about those because those were just good, like regular as good. Then there are some yellow parts, which I will probably talk about. Not all of the yellow parts, but most of them. And those are parts where I was like, yeah, this is really nice. And then there's the green parts, which are like, holy moly, this was amazing kind of parts. And that's basically it. There are no bad parts. I will point out things I would have done differently, but there are no bad parts in this, like literally 0. So with that, let's start with the first part, the opening. No pranks this time. So you can probably already see some of my comments on my notes, but let's talk about it anyway. I have listened to a few recordings of this violin concerto, and one thing I've noticed is that a lot of them do these really harsh bow takes in the opening, and that they're quite crisp usually, while Brett's version is quite slurred actually. So slurred in fact you can't really hear the rhythm of the first 2 notes. Which certainly is a choice. I mean, I think he does it purposely because he does it throughout, but I can't be sure. One positive thing about that is that you get this sweet tone that really fits the concerto. The bad thing about it though is that you can't really recognize the concerto immediately like you would in other recordings. And I noticed that when he plays the first fragment later in the piece, because it comes back a lot. If you want a more in-depth analysis of the fragments and all that, I have a video right here, just check it out. But anyway, when he uses the fragment later in the piece, it's not really that recognizable from the first main theme, which is either good or bad depending on how you interpret the piece. But then he gets to this part right here, and let's just listen to the opening of this part again. Do you hear those accents? I love those accents, he does them so well. And that was the first time during this performance that I thought, wow, he's really practiced this one, this is really good. Because, you know, a part of me was just like, oh, they're gonna make a joke of it or do something weird. But he really did a serious job and I'm loving it. But then after this part, there's quite a while where he's doing good, and then there's this part right here, and I'm just so in love with this phrasing. Like, it's amazing. And I think this is the first like long stretch during this performance that I was really like, oh wow, you're really good, man, this is awesome. Because it just sounds so great, and he phrases so well, and he holds the note where the notes needs to be held, and really works with the orchestra, and everything's just on point. Just listen to this, just listen for the phrasing and for how he holds the notes and all of that. Oh guys, I can't even begin to express how upset I was when listening to the live and hearing the woodwinds come in at this part. Brett's been playing beautifully, he's giving them everything they need to get this perfectly done, and they start too loud. Like, everything else was beautiful, everything after the beginning was amazing, but they started way too loud for how softly Brett played in the ending of that phrase. And speaking of phrase, this part right here is the most beautiful part. Brett does this like descending pattern beautifully, and I'm just so in love with that. And this kind of pattern comes back too later, and every time it's just wonderful. We just gotta listen to the end of that phrase again, the beautiful phrase, and the kind of disappointing woodwind start. Now this next part we're gonna listen to is just, oh my god, it's just so great, and his tone is so sweet, and he's doing the dynamics, and everything's just so great. I just can't begin to explain every single detail of why it's so great. Just listen to how sweet his tone is, and how he holds some notes, and how he emphasizes some notes, and everything's just fantastic. Wow, Brett, you're amazing, you know? So let's just listen to that. Now the next thing I want to look at is the next time he plays the second theme of the concerto, and that will be right here. In my humble opinion, this is the best time he plays this theme, and it sounds beautiful, of course. The woodwinds come in about in the middle of it, and you know how I feel about the woodwinds. They do kind of the same thing here, but it's better than the first time, I suppose. So yeah, let's listen, and I have some comments for the last few bars, which I have written into the score, so look out for those, I suppose. So obviously at this point I love the phrasing and everything's so beautiful, but then he puts in this harmonic right here and I'm not so sure I love that. It kind of caught me off guard a bit and stuck out in a weird way. I'm not sure if it's a fingering issue or what's up with that, but I didn't love that. Not as much as the other parts anyway. I don't really know if it's a common practice to do that on this part. I can't say I've noticed it as much before, so yeah, I don't know. But I don't love it, that's the point. But what I do love is how he transitions from the fermata into the next part. In a lot of recordings I've heard, they don't really take the proper amount of time, in my opinion, and it kind of blends together. But I love how Brett does it, it's beautiful. Let's listen to the last few bars again and listen out for the transition to the next part from the fermata because it's stunning. Then finally, as the last thing on the first movement, I want to acknowledge the crispness of this run right here. So before we move into the transition into the second movement, just acknowledge the crispness. And that, my friends, takes us right into the transition to the second movement. Let's just hear the opening and see if you guys agree that maybe it's just a tiny notch too fast. In addition to this, I want to acknowledge the bassoonist who plays the transition, because they do a wonderful job. Okay, I get it. It's not like insanely fast, but it's just a tiny notch. Let me actually just edit this just to be slightly slower. And the pitch may be just a bit off, but ignore that. And just listen to how it sounds now. Let's just try it from where Brett starts playing. That was 85% speed. Obviously the slowdown isn't perfect, but I still kinda prefer this tempo. But I'd love to hear what you think. Let me know in the comments down below. I do want to note that I love his phrasing still, so even though the tempo is a bit fast, within the tempo he's set, the phrasing is amazing. I will also mention that I think Brett does some great phrasing throughout this piece, but especially in this movement. If I had to look at every single place he does some great phrasing in this movement, we will be here all day. But there are two places I want to point out anyway. The first place is this little area right here where we get some accents. And basically I just love the way he does them, so let's just listen to that real quick. The last part of the second movement that I want to talk about is the last part of the second movement. The very last part, actually, the last 3 bars. Or actually, more specifically, the last 3 notes. Brett just places them amazingly in time, and I think the orchestra follows him quite well in this area. And it really helps with the build-up with the descending pattern we recognize from the first movement. Though, of course, the rhythmical value here is doubled. It's the same thing, basically. And the ending of the second movement leads perfectly into the beginning of the third movement, where Brett does an amazing job at switching between a solistic timbre and a tutti timbre. He starts out as the soloist, where he shows you the melody and the question kind of in this call and response kind of thing we have got going on. And then he joins the group for the answer. And while doing so, he just kind of floats on top. He doesn't really stick out from the crowd, and I think that works wonderfully. That echo effect on the last few notes there, oh my god, that gives me the good shivers. Then we skip a bit ahead, and I want to point out a small little part where he does something really good, and that is this part right here, where he just plays with such effortless intensity. And what do I mean by effortless intensity? To summarize it really basically, he's sounding like he's leading us somewhere, without sounding like he's trying to sound like he's leading us somewhere, if that made any sense at all. So let's have a quick listen to this part. So I realized the clip is a bit short, but you can kind of hear how he drives the melody forwards, which he's really good at. And the next moment we're going to look at is his perfect pitch boy moment, which obviously the perfect pitch boy nails amazingly. So let's have a listen to that, and then I promise we'll have a longer stretch afterwards. Okay, I can feel that you're yearning for some longer stretches with some of Brett's beautiful phrasing, and that's exactly what we're going to look at right now. This time, let's actually just listen to it and listen out for the phrasing and how he holds notes that needs to be held, and how he articulates the notes that needs to be articulated, and just enjoy this bit. Now, if you were able to read my handwriting, you could already see what I'm about to say. But if we look at this green part right here, what I really liked about this one is that it stuck out from everything else. And in general, I'm not really a fan of things just sticking out randomly in the middle of a phrase, but in this case it works really well because it hints to the next part, and it's really important that he made that difference, and he did, and that's amazing. And then of course he phrases the next part beautifully with the dynamics and everything. And look, I know that I've said that he phrases nicely a lot, but that's because he phrases nicely a lot. And this of course also applies for the next bit we're gonna hear, but before we move on to the next bit, let's have a quick re-listen to the last part of the one we just heard. And make sure to pay extra attention to how he changes up the way he articulates his notes. I think he did a really great job with that one. Now for the next bit we're gonna talk about, we actually have the ending of one phrase that leads into the beginning of another phrase. And for the ending of the previous phrase, I think he does a great job at merging with the orchestra in a productive way. In quite a few of the versions I've heard, I think the soloist tries to overpower the orchestra too much in this bit, which I don't think works that well, but the way Brett does it is that he just floats lightly on top of the orchestra. He doesn't try to overpower them or anything, he just goes with the flow. And I think the way he does that is amazing. And we also get a few harmonics in here, and I talked a bit about harmonics in the first movement that I didn't really agree with, but in this movement I think he's done well with where he has placed his harmonics. But anyway, the beautiful ending of the previous phrase leads into this new phrase, which consists of the best run of the entire performance. It starts better than it ends, but it's throughout generally really good. And it sounds impressive, which, it's a violin concerto, so it has to sound impressive. What's the point of a run if not to sound impressive? So let's have a listen to this, both the ending of the previous phrase and the whole of this run. And then finally, after this long concerto, which wasn't really long enough in my opinion, we get to the ending of the piece. And honestly, at this point, when I was watching the live stream, I was like, wow, I can't really believe that this is the ending. Is it over already? Because it was so much better than I thought it would be. Obviously, I knew that Brett is an amazing violinist, and obviously I knew that he would take this seriously, but that he would take it seriously to this degree, I really didn't know that. I think that may just be because of the way they portray themselves in their videos as these goofy kind of guys, and now suddenly I'm seeing him as a professional musician in front of a professional orchestra, But he did amazing throughout the whole piece. He had some extra energy throughout, he had the ability to phrase and to articulate the stuff that needed to be articulated. There are no parts where I thought, oh, this was something that should have been practiced more. He's obviously done everything really thoroughly and everything's just on point. The only major things I would really point at is that in some parts he's a bit ahead of the orchestra, and as I mentioned, I wanted the second movement to start a bit slower, but apart from that, it's just an amazing professional recording of the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. I would love to hear a studio recording of this, just saying. Because obviously this is a live performance, and live performances are never perfect, it literally never happens. Not even Hilary Hahn, not even Ray Chen, literally nobody does perfect live performances. And if they try to tell me that they do, they are lying. There are no such thing as a perfect live performance. A studio recording, on the other hand, where you can edit the bits that didn't go as well, or where you can do a retake, that's a whole other story. But anyway, for this last bit, I just want to say that Brett did a strong finish on this concerto, and I'm so in love with that. Just listen to the ending and enjoy it. Now the only thing left to say is thank you so much for watching. If you actually spent the full 30 minutes here, that's way impressive and you deserve a gold star or something. I hope you learned something, and I hope I gave some insight that you hadn't thought about before. And if you did enjoy it, I would be really happy if you press the like button, and if you enjoy my content in general, obviously there's the subscribe button as well. And if you have suggestions for stuff you want me to talk about, whether that is music theory or music history or just a different piece that you want me to look at, leave it down in the comments and I'll check it out. And with that, I hope to see you next time.